inevitable. That is the word many avoidants unknowingly attach to the super empath in their life. They believe the empath will always stay. The conversations will continue. The second chances will continue. The understanding will continue. No matter how much distance is created, no matter how many emotions are ignored, and no matter how many opportunities for connection are missed, there is often a quiet assumption that the empath will still be there tomorrow. But this belief hides a reality that many people fail to recognize until it is far too late. A super empath does not leave suddenly. A super empath does not wake up one day and stop caring for no reason. The process begins much earlier, beneath the surface, in ways that are rarely noticed by the person creating the emotional distance. While the avoidant is focused on protecting their independence, the empath is often fighting a silent battle between loyalty and self-respect. For months, sometimes even years, they continue giving energy to a connection that offers little in return. They continue hoping. They continue understanding. They continue making excuses for behavior that slowly drains them emotionally. Then one day, a shift occurs. It is not dramatic. It is not explosive. There are no long speeches, no emotional ultimatums, no desperate attempts to be understood. Instead, there is silence. A different kind of silence. A silence that signals acceptance rather than waiting. And this is the moment that often shakes an avoidant more than any argument ever could. Because many avoidants know how to handle pursuit. They know how to handle pressure. They know how to handle emotional conversations. What they often do not know how to handle is the complete absence of those things. In today's video, we are going to uncover why avoidance struggles so deeply when a super empath finally detaches. We will explore the hidden psychological dynamics that most people never discuss. We will look at why empathy can sometimes become predictable, why patience is often mistaken for permanence, and why the moment an empath stops chasing can completely change the emotional balance of a relationship. You will also discover lesser-known truths about avoidant behavior, including why some avoidants only recognize the value of a person after losing access to them, why detachment creates unexpected emotional consequences, and why the quiet departure of a super empath often leaves a much deeper impact than anger ever could. Most importantly, we will reveal what truly happens inside the mind of both the empath and the avoidant. When the connection finally reaches its breaking point, the answers may challenge what you think you know about attachment, relationships, and emotional withdrawal. So stay with us until the very end, because the final insight explains why a super empath's detachment is not a sign of weakness, bitterness, or revenge. It is often the beginning of a transformation that changes everything. And for the avoidant, who never thought that day would come, it can become the lesson they never expected to learn. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy deep insights into human behavior, psychology, relationships, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives, make sure to subscribe and join our growing community. Now, let's begin. Before the super empath detaches, a pattern usually develops that becomes so familiar that neither person fully notices it anymore. The empath becomes the emotional engine of the connection. They are the one who checks in after a difficult day. They are the one who sends the first message after an argument. They are the one who notices when something feels wrong and tries to talk about it. They are the one who keeps the emotional doors open, even when the other person keeps stepping away. Over time, this effort becomes routine. What once seemed special slowly becomes expected. The avoidant may not consciously decide to take this effort for granted, but human beings adapt quickly to consistency. When someone is always available, always understanding, and always willing to repair damage, that availability starts to feel normal. The avoidant begins living with the quiet assumption that the empath will continue doing what they have always done. If there is distance, the empath will close it. If there is tension, the empath will address it. If there is silence, the empath will break it. This creates a hidden imbalance that often grows stronger with time. One person becomes responsible for maintaining the emotional connection, while the other becomes accustomed to receiving that effort without fully recognizing its value. Many avoidants are not intentionally trying to hurt the people they care about. Their behavior often comes from discomfort with vulnerability, emotional dependence, or deep conversations that feel overwhelming. Because of this, they may pull away whenever emotional intensity increases. They create space when closeness grows. They become quiet when difficult feelings appear. Yet, the empath often responds by moving even closer. They try harder. They communicate more. They offer more patience. They search for solutions. They believe that enough understanding can solve the problem. What they fail to realize is that every time they carry the emotional responsibility alone, they reinforce a pattern. The avoidant learns that distance has few consequences because the empath will eventually restore the connection. The relationship survives because one person keeps rebuilding what the other person keeps stepping away from. At first, this dynamic can feel manageable. The empath sees their efforts as love. The avoidant sees the empath's persistence as reassurance. But beneath the surface, something important is happening. The empath is spending emotional energy at a much faster rate than they are receiving it. Every conversation requires effort. Every misunderstanding requires patience. Every period of distance requires self-control. While the avoidant is protecting their comfort, the empath is often sacrificing their peace. This is one of the least understood parts of the empath-avoidant dynamic. People often focus on the avoidant's fear of closeness, but they rarely talk about the emotional exhaustion that slowly builds inside the empath. A super empath does not usually detach because of one bad day. They do not leave because of one argument, one mistake, or one disappointing moment. In fact, one of the defining traits of a super empath is their ability to tolerate situations that many other people would leave behind much sooner. They see potential where others see problems. They see wounds where others see flaws. They see possibilities where others see dead ends. Because of this, they often remain committed long after the relationship becomes emotionally difficult. They continue believing that growth is possible. They continue hoping that understanding will create change. They continue giving chances that nobody else would give. This is where many avoidants make a critical mistake. They confuse patience with permanence. They mistake loyalty for endless tolerance. They assume that because the empath has stayed through previous disappointments, will stay through future disappointments as well. The longer this pattern continues, the stronger that assumption becomes. Months pass, sometimes years pass. The empath remains present. The empath remains supportive. The empath remains available. From the avoidance perspective, this consistency can start to feel permanent. What they fail to see is that every disappointment leaves a mark. Every ignored need creates a small crack. Every broken promise adds weight to an emotional burden that is already becoming difficult to carry. The super empath rarely talks about this burden openly. They may express concerns, they may try to communicate their needs, they may ask for more effort or more emotional presence. But even while expressing these concerns, they often continue giving. This creates confusion for the avoidant. The words suggest frustration, but the actions suggest commitment. The avoidant sees the empath staying and assumes everything is still secure. Meanwhile, the empath is quietly reaching a limit that nobody else can see. One of the most surprising truths about emotional detachment is that it often begins long before the relationship actually changes. The empath starts noticing patterns they previously ignored. They begin seeing promises that were never fulfilled. They begin recognizing how much energy they spend trying to maintain balance. They start questioning why their effort is not being matched. At first, these realizations are uncomfortable. The empath pushes them away. They return to hope. They return to patience. They return to understanding. But eventually, those realizations become impossible to ignore. This process happens slowly. There is no dramatic turning point. There is no single event that suddenly changes everything. Instead, it feels like a gradual awakening. The empath starts accepting truths they once resisted. They accept that love alone cannot change another person. They accept that understanding does not guarantee growth. They accept that caring deeply for someone does not mean sacrificing themselves indefinitely. These realizations create a shift that is difficult to detect from the outside. The empath may still be present physically. They may still respond to messages. They may still participate in conversations, but emotionally, they are beginning to step back. The avoidant usually does not notice this change immediately. The familiar pattern still appears to be intact. The empath is still there. The relationship still exists. The connection still seems available. But something important is disappearing. The emotional investment that once flowed so freely is starting to slow down. The empath no longer feels endless. Their energy becomes more selective. Their patience becomes more measured. Their willingness to absorb disappointment begins to fade. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Not because it is loud, not because it is dramatic, but because it is different. The empath stops chasing. The messages become less frequent. The emotional check-ins become less consistent. The attempts to repair every misunderstanding begin to disappear. The need to explain feelings over and over again starts fading. The empath no longer feels responsible for solving every emotional problem. They stop carrying the entire relationship on their shoulders. At first, this change may seem small. The avoidant might barely notice it. Life continues. The relationship appears unchanged. But as days and weeks pass, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. The usual reassurance is missing. The familiar emotional pursuit is gone. The empath is no longer rushing to close every gap. They are no longer fighting every silence. This is often when confusion begins to appear. The avoidant senses that something feels different, even if they cannot immediately explain why. The absence of emotional pursuit creates a strange emptiness. The relationship still exists, but the energy feels different. The atmosphere feels different. The certainty feels different. One reason this shift is so powerful is because the empath's silence is not the same as ordinary silence. In the past, periods of quiet may have been temporary. The empath would eventually return with another conversation, another attempt, another effort to reconnect. But now, the silence carries a different message. It carries acceptance. It carries surrender. It carries the realization that the empath is no longer trying to force a connection that only one person is maintaining. For many avoidants, this is the first moment they truly experience uncertainty. They were comfortable when the empath was pursuing because the relationship felt predictable. No matter how much distance existed, the empath remained emotionally available. That predictability created security. Once the pursuit stops, that security disappears. The silence begins asking questions that words never could. Why is the empath no longer reaching out? Why are they no longer reacting? Why do they seem calm instead of upset? Why does the distance suddenly feel permanent? These questions create discomfort because they challenge the familiar dynamic. The avoidant is used to managing closeness by creating space. But now, space no longer provides relief. Instead, it creates anxiety. The strategy that once protected them no longer works the way it used to. This is where another hidden truth emerges. Many people assume avoidants only want distance. In reality, most avoidants want connection too. They simply struggle with the vulnerability that deep connection requires. This creates an internal conflict. They pull away to feel safe, but they still want the relationship to remain available. They want independence without complete loss. They want space without permanent separation. When the super empath stops chasing, that balance collapses. The avoidant can no longer rely on the relationship remaining exactly where they left it. The certainty that once existed begins fading. For perhaps the first time, they are forced to confront the possibility that the empath may actually move on emotionally. Ironically, the absence of pressure often creates more discomfort than pressure itself. When the empath was pursuing, there was always something to respond to, something to avoid, something to manage. The relationship felt active. Once the pursuit disappears, there is nothing left to push against. The avoidant is left alone with their thoughts, their feelings, and the reality of what has changed. The familiar emotional feedback is gone. The familiar reassurance is gone. The familiar cycle is gone. No arguments, no emotional discussions, no attempts to pull them closer, no pressure to engage. What remains is silence. And within that silence, the avoidant begins facing a reality they may have spent a long time avoiding. The relationship no longer revolves around the empath's willingness to keep holding it together. The person who once carried the emotional weight has finally set it down, and the full impact of that change is only beginning to unfold. For a long time, the avoidant may not fully understand how much control they felt within the relationship. This control was not always intentional. In many cases, it developed naturally through repetition. The empath was the one who kept returning. The empath was the one who kept reaching out. The empath was the one who continued investing emotional energy even when very little was coming back. Because this pattern repeated over and over, it created a sense of predictability. The avoidant learned, consciously or unconsciously, that distance did not necessarily mean loss. Silence did not necessarily mean endings. Emotional withdrawal did not necessarily mean consequences. The empath would usually remain available. They would usually return to the conversation. They would usually try again. Over time, this created a powerful assumption. The relationship might experience tension, confusion, or emotional distance, but the connection itself felt secure. The empath seemed permanent. The empath seemed reliable. The empath seemed impossible to lose. Then everything changes. The empath stops seeking validation. This is often one of the first signs that true detachment has begun. In the past, the empath may have wanted reassurance. They may have wanted clarity. They may have wanted to know where they stood. They may have searched for proof that their efforts mattered. They wanted answers because they still believed the relationship could be strengthened through communication and understanding. But now the questions become fewer, the need for reassurance fades, the emotional chasing disappears. The empath is no longer trying to convince someone to value them. They are no longer trying to prove their worth. They are no longer measuring their value through another person's response. For the avoidant, this shift can feel surprisingly unsettling. The familiar dynamic is gone. The empath is no longer waiting. The empath is no longer sitting in uncertainty, hoping for a different outcome. They are no longer placing their life on hold while waiting for someone else to become emotionally available. They stop counting the days. They stop analyzing every message. They stop searching for hidden meanings. Their attention slowly turns inward. Their focus returns to their own life, their own goals, their own healing. At first, the avoidant may interpret this as temporary. They may assume the empath simply needs a little space. After all, previous periods of frustration usually ended with another attempt to reconnect. Previous disappointments usually led to another conversation. Previous silences usually ended with the empath returning. But this silence feels different. The emotional energy behind the relationship has changed. The avoidant begins noticing the absence of emotional pursuit, the absence of emotional dependence, the absence of emotional urgency. For perhaps the first time, the avoidant realizes they are no longer controlling the rhythm of the relationship. The person who once adapted to every distance is no longer adapting. The person who once absorbed every disappointment is no longer absorbing. The person who once waited is no longer waiting. And suddenly, uncertainty enters the picture. Uncertainty is uncomfortable for most people, but for many avoidants, uncertainty can be especially difficult. This is because avoidant individuals often use distance as a way to manage emotional discomfort. Distance creates predictability. Distance creates control. Distance allows them to regulate overwhelming emotions. But when the empath truly detaches, distance no longer provides the same sense of security. Instead, distance creates questions that have no immediate answers. What is the empath feeling now? Are they moving on? Do they still care? Will they come back? Or is this finally the end? The avoidant may not express these questions openly. In fact, many avoidants continue appearing calm on the surface. But internally, uncertainty can create significant emotional tension, because uncertainty forces people to confront possibilities. And one possibility now becomes impossible to ignore.